Hello friends, I am Nisha Sharma, Associate Professor, Department of English. The topic under discussion today is a critical appreciation of John Donne's poem, Death Be Not Proud. John Donne is generally grouped together with Andrew Marvell, George Herbert, and others as part of the metaphysical poets. Though, in truth, he is a singular talent in the English canon. This poem comes from the Holy Sonnet series, a group of Donne's poems that mostly deals with issues of faith, mortality, and religious anxiety. Of those poems, this is perhaps the most sure-footed. Others present more of a challenge to God and worry about man's relationship to his maker. But this was not always Donne's subject. As a younger man, Donne wrote marvelously constructed and extremely witty poems that tended to be more interested in love and sex than God and penance. The early poems, in fact, all of Donne's poems were not published widely during his lifetime, but circulated in small number amongst an exclusive group of people. The metaphysical poets was a description coined by the critic Samuel Johnson, who saw in Donne and his contemporaries a reliance on conceit, which is in essence an ingenious and sustained metaphor and an emphasis on the spoken quality of their work. In fact, Donne was often criticized by his contemporaries for not being stricter with his meter and form. Now, Donne is considered one of the foremost poets in the English language. Those qualities that made him seem inferior to some of his fellow poets and critics, his linguistic dexterity and his taste for the daringly imaginative, are those that make him endure so strongly. Holy Sonnet 10, often referred to as Death Be Not Proud, was written by the English poet and Christian cleric John Donne in 1609 and first published in 1633. The poem is a direct address to death, arguing that it is powerless because it acts merely as a short sleep between earthly living and the eternal afterlife. In essence, death is nothing to fear. Now, the summary of the poem. The poet John Donne uses the old fashioned Elizabethan English in his poems, that type of English that is sometimes referred to as Shakespearean English. In his poem Death Be Not Proud, he dwells on the subject of death and how to overcome. Of course, no one has power over death, therefore, overcoming death seems to be a delusion. The point says that death actually gives men and women a break from all the troubles of the world. According to Donne, death has its masters, and these are forces like chance, fate, kings, together with desperate men. The victims of death now have the chance to finally rest while death actually thinks it is eliminating supposed victims, it is offering them relief. Death is not in power because there are other forces that are responsible for taking lives. Drugs are superior to death in as much death brings relief. The poet then goes ahead to even to condemn death to death. Death, thou shalt die. This shows great irony. The poet Donne has personified death, and now death is like a character in the poem. The first stanza of the poem centers on the subject of the poem, death, and the audience. In the first line, the poet sends death a warning not to be proud, and in line 2, he asks death to re-evaluate his stand as the mighty and dreadful power. The second stanza is full of praise for death, a big contrast to the first stanza, which was only full of condemnation for death. Death is being praised for its good traits. Death is associated with pleasure. The poet talks of so much pleasure from the rest and sleep. The poet suggests that death is a source of relief from all the pain in the world. The victims of death get rest of their bones. Donne then goes back to condemning death again and accusing it having too much regard of itself. The poet suggests that death is not supreme and that there are forces, that death is but a slave to fate, chance, kings, and desperate men. At the end, the poet condemns death to death because it cannot actually kill anyone as it is a slave to greater force. Death to the poet has its own fate, death. Being dead, the Donne is a Christian and borrows from his Christian background that resurrection as the ultimate prize of believers. He believes he will overcome death. Death Be Not Proud is a representative poem of logic. Donne has presented death as a powerless figure. He denies the authority of death with logical reasoning, saying that death does not kill people. Instead, it liberates their souls and directs them to eternal life. He does not consider it man's invincible conqueror. Instead, he calls it a poor fellow without having free will. The arrival of death is also compared with a short rest and sleep that recuperates a person that upcoming journey. The poet's denial to the conventional approach of death gives the reader a new interpretation. Now, the theme of the poem, and the theme is the powerlessness of death. In this sonnet, often referred to by its first line or as Holy Sonnet 10, the speaker directly addresses death, seeking to divest it of its powers and emphasize that man, though fated to die, is more powerful than death itself. The poem paints a picture of death as prideful, vain, even, and works to deflate death's importance by arguing firstly that death is nothing more than a rest, and secondly, that following this rest comes the afterlife, which contradicts death's aim of bringing about a final end. With death's powerlessness proven by the end of the poem, it is death itself, not man, who is going to die. The speaker clearly argues against death being treated as something strong and important. In essence, he reasons that nobody who dies is actually dead. Though death is personified as a boastful figure that proudly trades on its reputation as mighty and dreadful, the speaker, through logical argument, aims to show death as petty and weak. In order to build this picture of poor death as a pitiable figure, the speaker directly confronts death, insisting that not yet canst thou kill me, and quickly establishing the point as a message of defiance. Death is then compared to sleep, one of the most commonplace and beneficial of all human activities. People generally feel good after sleep and rest. The poem reason, so why shouldn't they feel good after death? Death is simply a rest for men's bones, their physical selves, while their souls move on to the afterlife. Having established death as nothing more than a restful passage between life on earth and the eternal life, the speaker presents death's more fearful properties, represented by images like the Grim Reaper, as comically inaccurate. One can read the speaker's declaration that death thou shalt die as his assertion that this idea of death as something frightening and omnipotent will meet its end. The speaker of the poem thus aims to flip death on its head. Its pride is misplaced because it is nothing for people to be afraid of. The speaker achieves this by literally talking down to earth, making a mockery of its inflated idea of itself. The poem also paints death as slave to earthly things, further emphasizing death's powerlessness. Death is associated with fate, chance, kings, disparagement, poison, war, and sickness. It is completely of the earth, the speaker implies, and depends upon earthly things for its existence. Death is not a master of anything, then, but a slave. Even as a form of death, death isn't all that impressive. Indeed, the speaker mentions poppy and charms as better means of obtaining rest. Thus, whichever way death is looked at, it is inferior to something else. It is essentially irrelevant. Summed up by the speaker's question, why swellest thou then? The speaker asked death what it actually has to be prideful about. Overall, the point presents death as having just one function, transporting or shifting people between life and the afterlife. With its fearsome power dispelled, death itself can die. Now, the use of symbols in the poem. And the first symbol is that of sleep. As part of the argument against the power of death, the speaker repeatedly refers to sleep and rest. In a sense, sleep is a symbol of death itself. When someone is asleep, they are unconscious and thereby separated from their interactions with the world and other people, just as they will be permanently in death. Sleep is also a kind of restorative retreat, good for the mind and body that everybody needs. The speaker uses this symbol for two main reasons. If death is a kind of sleep, it is nothing to be feared. Sleep is a good thing. In fact, if death is a kind of super sleep, it is even something to be looked forward to. Secondly, the kind of sleep that death represents is not a permanent one. In the belief system of this point, it is nothing but an unconscious transition from earthly living to the afterlife. Sleep therefore becomes a general symbol for the ultimate harmlessness of death. Then uses the idea of Christian and eternity to argue that death is something that people pass through on their way to a new eternal life. A good Christian must experience death, the end of life on earth, but in the long run, he or she can't be killed. Donne and the metaphysical poets in general are masters of the surprise ending, and this one is no exception. In traditional Christian theology, it is thought that when people die, it is like they are asleep until the end of the world or judgment day. At this point, Jesus wakes everyone up to lead them to heaven, where they will spend eternity. Therefore, when the apocalypse happens and the world ends, there isn't any more death. All good Christians will have eternal life in heaven. The poem's final words seal the deal. Death, thou shalt die. Next symbol is bones. Speaker refers to death as a kind of rest for the bones. Bones are a stand-in for the physical body itself and its earthly mortality. The whole poem depends upon religious faith, which presents a division or a duality between the body and the soul. The body represented by bones doesn't last long, but the soul lives on forever. Bones thus represent what people leave behind when they head for the afterlife. The association between death and human bones is a long-standing and logical one, given the process of decay that eventually leaves only the bones as the last trace of the physical body. The best men soonest follow this due death into the afterlife, thinking that he will give the rest of their bones and free or deliver their Christian souls from all the pain of earthly life. Note that deliver can also refer to childbirth, which adds to the whole new life idea. They are the hardest working and bravest people in society, so they get to kick their feet back and enjoy eternal rest before everyone else. We think that if Donne lived today, he would include women in this group as well. The speaker almost certainly refers to people like soldiers and martyrs who sacrifice themselves for the greater good. Is Donne being too cute here? After all, not that many soldiers are really thrilled to go off to war, and few people go to war intending to die, otherwise, they wouldn't be very good soldiers. Dunn makes it sound like the best men volunteer for death, when in most cases, they only volunteer to risk death in order to achieve something else. It is worth keeping in mind how downright sneaky this point can be. It almost makes you want to run out and take on one of the world's most dangerous jobs, slavery. In the poem, the speaker works hard to divest death of its intimidating and fearsome character. This is done largely by personifying death and preempting any line of argument that might prove death's power. As part of this, then the speaker reverses the idea that death rules over humankind by referring death itself in personified form as a kind of slave. Furthermore, death is slave to fate, chance, kings, and desperate men, which are either out of death's control, fate and chance, or specifically within humankind's control, kings and desperate men. Whichever way death turns, then it is slave to something or someone else. The evocation of slavery thus further symbolizes death's ultimate powerlessness in lines 5 6. The speaker argues that death will be just like sleep, except even better, but now he says, all who needs death who needs death anyway? If I want to sleep really well, I can just use drugs and magic charm. This seems to conflict with the idea that death is supposed to be way more pleasurable than sleep, but who cares? The speaker's on a roll and doesn't have time to think about whether his arguments make perfect sense. When you are trying to insult someone, it's more important to be clever and think on your feet. The poppy is a flower used to make opium, an old fashioned drug that makes people really happy but also turns their skin yellow. In fact, drugs and magic charms work even better than death at bringing on sleep. Stroke is another interesting word. It could refer to stroking someone like one might stroke a child's head to put him to sleep, or it could refer to the stroke of a sword, which is obviously much more violent. Or it could imply the stroke of a clock at the exact moment of death, totally demolishing death's claim to be the ultimate sleep aid. The speaker puts death in his place, telling him not to swell with pride. This rhetorical question culminates the poem's entire argument up to this point. In Petrarchan sonnets like this, it's a standard for the poem to shift or turn at line 9. This shift can be slight or it can be a total U-turn. We think this sonnet has more of a slight turn. The speaker raises his intensity in these lines and becomes more hostile towards death, calling him names and taunting him as a slave. With the metaphor of the slave, the speaker suggests that death doesn't act on his own free will and instead is controlled or manipulated by other things like fate, chance, kings, and desperate men. Let's take these one by one. Like death, fate is often treated as a person in the future. Fate is thought to control everything that happens to people, including when they will die. So, death doesn't decide when people will die, it just carries out orders from fate. Chance is kind of the opposite of fate. So, again, it's sneaky of them to put them side by side. Chance is luck, the idea that things can happen for no particular rhyme or reason. If you die when a meteor crashes through your house in the middle of the night, that's sheer bad luck, and there's nothing you can do about it. Kings are different from fate and chance because they are real people, but they have a similar kind of control over when and how people die. A king can send soldiers to die in battle or sentence people to execution. Desperate men, we think, refers to people who commit suicide or do stupid and reckless stuff, which might as well be suicide. If you decide to take your own life, it pretty much robs death of the only card he has to play. In line 10, the speaker brings another accusation against death. claiming that he hangs out or dwells with those notarial thugs, poison, war, and sickness. In other words, Death's friends are total losers. It might be obvious by now, but we'll repeat it anyway. Dunn treats these three things like people. What do poison, war, and sickness have in common? Easy. They all kill lots and lots of people. Moreover, they are all generally considered bad or painful ways to die. Now, an analysis of the literary devices in the poem. Literary devices are used to bring clarity, richness, and uniqueness to the text. Donne has used various literary devices to allow readers to try to find more interpretations. The analysis of some of the literary devices is given below. Personification. Personification means to attribute human features to non-human things. Donne has personified death throughout the poem, stating it should not be proud. Being proud is a human quality, hence death is given a human quality of having feelings and emotions. Metaphor. There are three metaphors in this poem. The first is used in the opening line, Death be not proud. Here, death is compared to a proud man. The second is used in ninth line, Thou art slave to fate. In the last line, eh, is an extended metaphor where death is compared to the non existent or unrealistic object. Alliteration. Alliteration is the repetition of the same consonant sounds in the same lines of the poetry, such as use of the, in, and better than thy straw, by swellest thou then, and sounded much pleasure than from thee much more must flow. Metonymy. Metonymy is a type of metaphor in which an object is used to describe something closely related to it. In this point, poppy and charm are used to produce gentle sleep or death. Assonance. Assonance is the repetition of the vowel sounds in the same line of poetry, such as the sound of a in Thou art slave to fate, charms, kings, and desperate men, and the sound of a in Sonest our best men with thee do go. Irony. Irony means a statement that may mean something different from or the opposite of what is written. Irony often expresses something other than their literal intention, often in a humorous way. For example, death, thou shalt die. Apostrophe. This point is not just an argument against death, but an argument with death. To make this argument work, the speaker employs apostrophe throughout the entire poem to directly address death as if it were a person. Essentially, the speaker is trying to deflate the sense of death's power by tackling its head on. The first word of line 1 uses apostrophe to make it absolutely clear to whom this poem is addressed. Apostrophe is also closely linked to another device, personification. The two combine to make death seem like a prideful, misguided individual who has got the completely wrong idea about their role in the lives of humankind. Line 4 uses characterizes death as a pitiable figure. Apostrophe both opens and ends the poem. The beginning lets the reader know that an argument directed at death is to follow. The poem's ending, Death thou shalt die, tells the reader that the argument is finished and irrefutable. The poem further foregrounds the use of apostrophe through capitalization. Lines 1, 4, and 14 turn death into capital D. Vocabulary. An archaic form of you. The words used for you are thee, thou, art, thinkest, dost, and dust, canst, thy, as well as these are all archaic use. Form, meter, and rhyme scheme of death be not proud. Death be not proud is a sonnet and is specifically close to the Petrarchan variety. Sonnets are a tight form that lend themselves well to argument consisting of a proposition and a response. This sonnet is grouped into two main sections, the octave and the sestet, where the poem turns to for its perspective on what has come before. The turn in this poem is subtle as it is primarily an intensification of the argument against death as a powerful force. This is a deliberate strategy that allows the argument to build increasing momentum towards the poem's concluding question of line 12 and the following two lines response. Death Be Not Proud is an Italian sonnet in rhyme scheme, but a Shakespearean sonnet in structure. The ending of the poem also represents a departure from the Petrarchan sonnet in that Donne writes a concluding couplet, which is more in keeping with the Shakespearean sonnet form. The final couplet allows for a further shift in the poem, this time to state as clearly as possible the reason why death is powerless, the eternal altered life. The poem can thus be thought of both as an octet and a sestet and as three quatrains and a couplet. Donne's choice of the Petrarchan sonnet form seems a bit deliberately ironic in his case for the following reason. Petrarchan sonnets were often addressed to beautiful women. Donne's speaker, however, addresses a figure whom we normally consider ugly and terrifying. The speakers of Petrarchan sonnets are often foolish and shallow, but the speaker of Donne's sonnet is dealing with a profoundly important issue. The speakers of the Petrarchan sonnets are often obsessed with the temporary beauty of this world, but the speaker of Donne's sonnet has his mixed feeling on higher things. The speakers of Petrarchan poems are often frustrated and they rarely achieve the things they desire, whereas the speaker of Donne's sonnet seems quite confident because of his Christian faith that he will defeat death. Now the meter. The meter in Death Be Not Proud is iambic pentameter throughout, with a few instances of variation. Modern readers might struggle to hear the iambic pentameter cleverly because of changes in the way certain words are pronounced. For example, called in Donne's era could have been said with two syllables, call. Line 5 gives an example of perfect iambic pentameter from rest and sleep, which but thy pictures be. The poem uses its steady meter to reinforce the argument that death is powerless. For example, the ensemble at the end of line 3 and the use of punctuation at the start of line 4 means that line 4 can be read die not. Here, die would usually be a stressed word, but the poem's manipulation of its meter forces the reader to emphasize the second word instead. This, of course, foregrounds the poem's view that death is nothing more than the beginning of the afterlife. The rhyme scheme of the first 8 lines follows the pattern ABBA, ABBA. This is the typical scheme found in Petrarchan sonnets, but the sestet diverges from the Petrarchan setup and rhymes CBDCEE. In terms of rhyme, then the poem can be divided into 3 quatrains, 2 of which forms the octet and an ending couplet. The development towards the couplet at the end lends force to the conclusion, which is making the bold claim that death itself will die. The speaker of the poem. The speaker in Death Be Not Proud is anonymous, though critics often take the Holy Sonnet to be an expression of John Donne's own struggles with his Christian faith. However, nothing in the poem definitely proves Donne to be the speaker. In fact, as the poem is essentially a logical battle with death, it's reasonable to think of the speaker as representing humanity itself. Specifically, the poem's speaker chastises death from the standpoint of certainty. They believe in the eternal afterlife. And for them, this sole fact undoes everything that is usually terrifying or intimidating about the thought of death. The speaker talks widely about the world and particularly humankind's role in it or opposed to death's. This supports the idea that speaker positions himself as a kind of defender of humanity, taking on depth through a series of unfolding logical propositions. But of course, it's up to the reader to decide if the speaker's standpoint is convincing. If the poem is worked through backwards, all of the speaker's confidence and assertiveness is wholly reliant on their belief that following death comes the eternal afterlife. The speaker takes the afterlife as a given, making the poem as much about faith as it is about death. In turn, then, it is fair to say that the speaker is making an argument to their reader. Have faith and do not fear death. The setting of the poem. The setting of death be not proud is non-specific. In general, the poem is set on earth as opposed to heaven, which it gestures towards. It is a poem that makes its argument in broad strokes, taking a look at death's role on earth and arguing against the fear of time. That said, there are one or two moments that seem to tie the poem to the 17th century and to Europe more specifically. The first 8 lines gives little away in terms of setting, but lines 9 to 11 provide some interesting clues. Line 9 accuses death of being slave to kings, referencing the role of monarchs in the doling out of death among subjects. War was not uncommon at the time of the poem's writing in 1610, which was not long after the end of the Anglo-Spanish War. This conflict, as with many others, was ultimately presided over by monarchs. Likewise, the religious turmoil in Europe was closely linked with its monarchies. In line 11, Pope links the poem to the 17th century Europe as well. The word is a euphemism for opium, a relatively popular drug in England at the time. Thus, the literary analysis shows that Donne has made his poem appealing using diverse literary devices. Thank you.